So,
Keep dreaming.
Like, well, you know,
A time machine?
do you have a time machine?
I like that one.
Because otherwise you may be in a world of hurt. I sort of, you know, I think
yeah. What time is it?
it's 7:10 almost. So, yeah. Okay, well, welcome everybody. Good to see you all. Thanks for coming out on a rainy, stormy evening. Everybody get a chance to sign in? I think we probably all know each other, but what do you think? Should we go around the room just to introduce ourselves? I'm Doug Gooden, President.
Okay, Sanford Pomeranz, member.
Ed Warder, Wes Chapels.
Angel Romero,
Amy Malloy.
Right?
Jeff. And Gary.
Parker Lessick.
Mark Weiss.
Russell Valentine.
Now we're gonna have a memory test. and see-
Okay, yes, now.
Start over again. Go.
Now, everyone repeat all the names. Okay, well, again, welcome. It seems like it's been a while since I've been here. I don't know, I think I missed the last meeting and possibly even the one before that, so good to be back. Anyway, just a few things, I guess, as ever. First of all, the upcoming events, of course, this is the general meeting, so you must know that because you're here. Next public night, is this correct that May 11th is the next public night? Because that was what was on the website, but I was trying to figure out if that's what, a week from Saturday, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, in which case I can't make it.
2 weeks from
but-
Saturday.
2 weeks from
2 weeks,
Saturday?
yeah.
Oh, I might be able to make it then. Maybe not, though. Anyway. But anyway, here's the upcoming event. So next general meeting will be May the 23rd. As ever, if anybody wants to have a thing they want to present on, I'm always looking for volunteers. So if anyone wants to jump in there, if you've got a suggestion of a topic that you'd like to know something about, pass that along too. I'd be happy to hear. And so on. Any other announcements? Anything for the good of the order?
Sent out a note to people, and probably everybody's seen it, but there's a upcoming, actually a couple of them, but there's an upcoming asteroid occultation that might be interesting. I can do it from Sandlot, or it can be done from Farpoint. Sandlot's on the southern side of the center line. Farpoint's on the northern side, so you get kind of perspective with just two observatories.
Right.
Anyway, that's.
Sorry, we're passing treasurer duties and had to torture.
Okay, okay. Well, so when is
Anyway.
that now? Go ahead.
May 7th, I think, is it's a morning, like a Tuesday morning, 2 o'clock in the morning, basically, when it happens, so you gotta be kind of on by about 1 o'clock in the morning. So
Okay, I was thinking I might, I can probably make it because that's, I think, during the finals week, so my time gets a little more flexible.
Yeah.
And I would definitely be interested in that. I know occultation timing is one of those things that people do.
Well, we've got pretty good resources now with, you know, our timing and situation. Like, we even have a camera that theoretically would be perfect for timing.
I saw
I don't know
the,
how we're gonna do it with the video, but we'll
Well,
see.
I did see the, that link you sent, and I loaded that little bit of software, and then I also found kind of a Linux version that does something similar to that. So I spent a little bit of time over lunch kind of playing around a little bit.
It's really nice because it sets everything up for your personal observatory or whatever location, and it gives you all kinds of data, and it keeps updating as time goes on. So if there's any changes, you get that information come down on that. So it's an amazing piece of software.
Yeah.
It's a freebie, so.
Yeah. Well, there was I ran into a website. You ever see these? I can't remember what the brand name of them is, but they're these little telescopes that you can buy that are sort of,
Oh, yes.
what are those things called? They're
Well, one's a C-Star.
C-Star, and what's the other one?
I can't tell you.
They're kind of these turnkey telescopes that you can
Yeah.
buy, and they're not particularly big aperture, but they're
I
very
think they're
high tech.
about a 2.5-inch aperture or
Yeah.
something like that, as I remember.
But you get one of these things, and they actually kind of tie into, you know, data you can contribute and stuff like that. Problem is they're very, very expensive,
They're not.
and pretty
They're not anymore.
aren't they?
No, they're like $500.
Wow, the one I was looking at was like 3,000.
Yeah.
I think that's
and
the Stellina.
The new ones now, I think it's ZWO that puts them out. But the new ones, the C-Stars are like $549 or something like that.
Yeah.
And they do a lot of stuff that the $3,000 ones do.
Yeah, there was a review comparing the C-Star and the
Yeah.
other, whose name we can't remember.
Yeah.
It costs about $500, comparing those to those that are running $2,000, $2,500.
I mean, they do
And they
the
came out with
stacking,
comparison.
yeah.
Is
it's
it like an
pretty
electronic imaging?
Yeah.
Instead of
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
I think you can look through them, but they're kind of set up
They're
intrinsically
really set
for,
up to be a.
for
yeah,
imaging.
To be a, and they're set up to do stacking.
Right.
So they'll stack a bunch of images, and I saw a demonstration when I gave that talk in Lawrence. The guy had one of them, and he said, you know, for $550, and he was showing some people, and he was shooting M31, you know, on the south side of Lawrence, so there was a lot of light pollution around.
Yeah.
A lot. And so, and he picked it up and he started stacking images and had a really nice image by the time he was done.
Yeah, those things
So-
are,
And this is
they're
without
pretty cool.
another telescope itself?
That's just itself.
Itself.
That was all, and it did everything.
So what's the?
Yeah, they're about the size of
All
this.
C-Stars.
The $500 one is what called?
C-Stars?
Just the C.
I think that's C-Stars.
Yeah, that's made by,
I can't think of what the other one,
Okay.
the other one, I can't think of what it was called.
Unistellar.
Unistellar,
Yeah,
yeah.
Unistellar was one of them.
But that one, it
Selena.
comes with this whole, ties into this whole network
Sarah.
of
Yeah,
things that, anyway, I thought those were kind of
yeah.
cool.
Well,
Plate solving, all that goes with it.
one of the helpful things about it is that in the software, it will give you pictures, you know, arrayed by, you know, NGC or Messier of items that are, where you can see them at that particular time. And you just touch, you know, the screen on your iPad or computer, and it will go right to it.
Takes all the
Track it.
work and fun out of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
kind of
no
what,
problem.
that was sort of what I wondered about, is this is making it too easy, you know?
Yeah.
You
Well,
can't-
we've thought that for years, since the day of, you know, film. Remember film?
I do remember.
Yeah, that was
I
fun.
remember taking
Picture
a,
wait 2 weeks to see the
That's
other.
right, yes.
I remember spending an awful lot of
Crazy or-
time taking a spectrum on film. This is when I was in college and working for my grumpy German professor. And apparently I used the wrong, you know, took it to the dark room and used the wrong developer on it, and instead of developing it, it basically just removed the emulsion completely. All I had was, had a clear piece of film left, and oh my God. I think my ears are still burning from the chewing that I got for that particular mistake, so, anyway. Anything else? I guess maybe, Tony, should we announce that you're now the treasurer? So Tony has agreed to take over as treasurer, and Dave, of course, is passing the torch, which thank you for your long and distinguished service for that. But thank you for taking on that job, so.
Looking forward to it.
Good. We'll see how long that lasts.
All right, we know where that's coming from now.
Okay, any other announcements or issues of interest?
Did you do who went to the eclipse and saw the eclipse?
Well, we're gonna go through
Okay.
some pictures here. I did have a couple things I wanted to point out. If anybody's interested in the MISRAL, or whatever it is, the Mid-States Regional Astronomical League meeting, it's June 7th through the 9th in Omaha. Registration is apparently open. One of the speakers is actually a K-State professor who's a member of NECAL and has spoken to us before, Bharat Rachos, who some of you perhaps know or remember. The rest of these people, I don't know who they are, but they probably be kind of an interesting conference. And this is the keynote speaker, who's a historian at Lowell Observatory, which would probably be kind of interesting because there'd be, stuff about Pluto and Clyde Tombaugh and all that, who we've talked about at meetings before. So if you're interested in going to this, I don't know, I got this in my email the other day, maybe some of you did as well, but I thought I'd pass that along. They are actually, MSRAL is actually accepting nominations for the Amateur of the Year award. So if you know anybody that might be a suitable nominee who's active in this organization, you might want to pass them along. Anyway, so that was one announcement that I thought I might throw out there. The other one is, sometimes I talk about stuff you can see, but since we're going to look at eclipse pictures, I thought I'd cut that back a little bit. But I just wanted to remind everybody that the Lyrids are active. I actually saw some the other night when it was clear. Of course, you're not going to see anything tonight, but actually saw some the other night. So it was. So if you're interested in one of the meteor showers, this is a good one. Okay. So eclipse. How many of you went someplace where it was total?
Yeah.
A lot of you? I did not. I had class that morning, so I went outside the building where I teach and looked up and saw the partial eclipse. But I know some of you sent some pictures, and I thought I would kind of share those with everyone. So if you're one of them and you want to kind of narrate your pictures a little bit, I would be very happy for that. But I thought I'd start off with Paige, who is not here, I don't think. But this was a picture that Paige sent. Nice total. This was the only one I got from her, but thought that was kind of a nice one. Here's Gary's pictures, whole sequence. I hope I got these in the right order.
That was actually prior to the little kids coming up and messing with my focuser just before totality.
Yeah.
Just before
So
totality.
tell them that.
Those are sunspots.
Yeah, there's. So I hope I got these in the right. You can see.
Yeah,
this?
that was the beginning. That's
There's one.
getting close to totality.
I thought this was a really nice one of totality.
A little bit of the inner throwing on that one.
And you can see some of the prominences here in this one. Was this shot through some kind of a diffusing filter or something that's separating out the colors? That was.
No, that was just from being out of focus.
Okay.
That's the effect you get when you get out of focus.
So you had a little aberration. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what kind of telescope was this?
10-inch Meade.
Okay.
It's one that has had a spider that got into the primary,
Yeah.
and it was a small spider, so he's still there.
Okay.
Part of the unit now.
So.
Did you run off a battery?
I actually ran off the car battery. I bought a little inverter and all kinds of things just in case, and so I had lots of options on power.
Okay. Cool.
It's the diamond ring, of course.
Yeah.
So will this be the last one in the sequence, right?
Yeah, I think that is.
Okay.
I think that's coming back the other side now.
Like I said, I was kind of, I thought I had them in the right order, but I just wanted to make sure that I did them total. Is Michael? Is Michael here?
I don't think so.
No. So these were some from the partial. I guess no idea what the camera is or the equipment on this one, but I thought they were nice ones. There's the last one. George,
Yeah.
you wanna?
I got those out to Park Point,
Okay.
and then I got run out by a range fire.
Oh, where was it? Yeah, that was. Yeah. I saw that one on the satellite image that there was a fire out there. So.
Yeah.
Early April.
Again, I was kind of guessing at the order here, so I
Yeah.
don't know. Well, I did, but
What kind of filter did you use?
It's called Star Guy. It's a solar
Okay.
filter on a 50mm Nikon lens.
Cool.
Ms. Parker and your grandson, right? The
Well, my grandson, granddaughter, one of my sons was having surgery at the med center, so we had a great time. We set up in a grassy area in the parking lot.
so maybe this should be grandchildren.
Yeah.
Sorry, didn't mean to exclude anyone. I like these a lot, actually. The appearance of the photosphere on this one I really liked. I think I really distinctly remember the first time I ever looked at the sun through a telescope, of course, with suitable filtering and all that, and the way it looked, that sort of boiling rice look to it, really made kind of an impression.
So what filter is it?
It's a Lens 60mm pressure tune telescope with hydrogen alpha.
Okay, it's just like it out. It's not a specified bandwidth.
No. Well, in the hydrogen alpha.
I mean, it's
Most of them are
like-
under
yeah.
1 angstrom.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you can change to a slight degree the wavelength
Yeah,
by the pressure
you focus
tune.
in will do
Right,
that.
right.
And that allow you to pick up more of the granulation or the prominence. And the trick is to try to get a little bit of both.
Yeah.
I tried to kind of drag this a little bit bigger so that it would be a little more visible on the screen, but it kind of generalized all the detail a little bit too much. So I figured I would kind of keep it at the resolution that I got it at to sort of maintain the, because I don't know, it's not easy to see, but when I was looking on the screen, I'm like, you can really see detail in the prominences that.
Have you sent that in, like Sky and Telescope and everything? You got some great photography.
Yeah, I was
images
kind of
there.
thinking that too. It's that's going to be one kind
Especially
of.
of that flare.
Yeah,
It's one of the best I've seen.
yeah. I was. Yeah, I remember you suggested that, and I kind of would tend to agree. I thought that was a really excellent picture. Here's Russ's, which I actually found, so we can go. I tried, not very hard, but I did try to see, at one point to see if I could download this and then set music to it. Because I thought, the theme from 2001 would fit really nicely here. I was not able to do that, but we can
You
still.
realize how long ago 2001 was?
I know. When I first saw that movie, it just seemed like such a long time in the future. Now it seems like such a long time in the past.
Wow.
I don't know. Russ, how did you get this one?
I had it on. I had a Canon with 250mm with just a film solar filter on a tracker, and then I had an intervalometer taking an image. And then I don't know, about 60 seconds before the total, I took the filter off. That's when it went all white. And then, so this is without the filter. And the image is cropped, and I tried to align it and stuff. But I ran out of patience to actually make it more smooth. It's kind of still a little bit jumpy, but
Yeah, I liked this one. All the detail on the around it and all that was, I thought,
oh yeah.
very nice.
getting
filter.
that out there, weren't you?
The what?
A little late on getting that out of there.
Oh, yeah.
Is that clouds?
It's tree branches, actually.
Oh.
Yeah.
And this was from Arkansas?
Yeah. In Hot Springs Village, Arkansas.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Well, somebody said there was like 14,000 people there or something like that in
The
Hot Springs.
traffic was
That's
That's so
terrible.
many there was on the road on the
Yeah,
way
it was-
back.
I
Really?
took off right after, and Russ, Gary, and I were kind of fairly close in town-wise, just worked out that way. I took off right after, I took off before the eclipse was completely done, and I was in bumper to bumper for 4 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
I
terrible
could not
traffic
believe how
conditions.
bad the traffic was.
We ended up going up north because that was the way to avoid it, but then you got back roads and you got, you know.
Took me forever to get home.
Yeah. So you just
It
did like
was a 6-hour trip going in and 9.5
I
hours.
just went
going
down, and came back.
Yeah.
Yikes.
Yeah. Well, you know.
I was busy moving, I can't afford to waste days. But I'm glad I saw it.
Yeah.
It was a good eclipse.
It was.
I finally got to see one.
Well, the one I kind of felt like the last time that we had the total here, I got so lucky. You know, I found one hole and was able to pretty well see it, but I know it was a big disappointment for a lot of people. Anyway.
Yeah, the rest of us hated you at the time.
I was okay with that. So this obviously is not a picture that any of us took, but I thought I would throw that in there to, I've always just been fascinated by what eclipses look like from space. You know, they just look like these big circular shadows moving across the. So this was a shot, obviously, from the International Space Station, and you can see that by the time they shot this is somewhere in Canada, I think. But you can kind of see what these look like. So I thought I would throw that in there just as a kind of a bonus. Anybody else got any that they want to show?
Yeah, my grandson got a really good shot.
Yeah.
Bailey's Beat came up really good.
We just
Mine went
watched
out
it.
of focus.
Yeah. We just watched it from the lawn, basically the quad lawn at K-State. So, and you know, the thing that really struck me about it was that you know, you didn't get dark obviously, but it seemed like for the longest time you'd look up and you could see the little bit of coverage, but it didn't get very dim until all of a sudden,
Yeah.
very close to the time when it kind of reached its max, then it kind of dimmed down a little bit. But we had I was explaining to my class, you know, if they go watch it, do it safely, and I mentioned that there was a lot of counterfeit glasses floating around out there that were, and one of the things that they told to look for is if the lenses were square. You know, that was one of the things that the counterfeiting ones had. They didn't have the rounded corners. I had a kid come up and holding these, and I said, yeah, unfortunately, I would not use those. So I gave him one pair of mine. So I was kind of sharing, but I couldn't watch the whole thing. But anyway. Any other thoughts on the eclipse?
It was amazing.
Yeah?
I had a Sony camera. It wasn't real fancy, but I took a video as it was coming, just at the end of totality in it, when the light started to come back. And it was, you know, every second it got brighter.
Yeah.
That was amazing.
Yeah.
Did anyone measure the temperature? We
Yeah.
should go to the thermometer. I
Yeah, I
could
did
feel
see
the
a couple
temperature
cities,
drop.
they recorded like a 4-degree temperature drop.
It was,
It
it was noticeable out
Yes.
at Far Point. I could tell that it was,
I could tell here, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, my
It dropped over.
grandson measured it, he measured an 11-degree drop.
I measured like 10.7 where I was at, and not only that, the humidity went from 21% to 42%.
It is
Because
gas.
the atmosphere was cooling and
Yeah.
humidity goes up, and then it went back down as it passed. It was an interesting experience.
You did see the next one in like 20 years, I think. It's supposed to cut across like southern Kansas.
Yeah,
It showed
Dodge
Wichita.
City.
Yeah, Dodge City.
Mm.
Yeah,
That-
they're planning for it.
Oh, yeah.
August
I
12th.
think I'd be over
It was
100 years
Wednesday.
old.
Maybe you better make hotel reservations now.
I think maybe Reykjavik,
Yeah.
Reykjavik in a couple of years.
42, I think, yeah.
Go to Iceland.
Yeah,
It's an excuse to go to Iceland.
that would be good. They didn't, by the way,
Across the wine country in Spain.
Is it? Yeah, but early on. And I don't know that you're gonna get a good experience.
Sorry, no, that's gonna be pretty long, yeah.
so anybody that went to where it was total, did you see the Comet?
No, and a lot of people, I saw a lot of stuff online and they said, you're not gonna see the comet because it's just too faint.
Well, I kind of wondered because they were saying, you know, it would be kind of more or less in the same part of the sky as some of the planets, right?
I saw
It's
a
the
couple of
Venus.
pictures that had the comet in it, but, you know, you're assuming that they didn't fake it, but
Yeah.
some people, I remember seeing one picture that had the comet and some planets during totality.
Because it should probably be visible just in the night sky before
I think it's really low.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's below the horizon right now, but the reason we could see it is because of the time difference. But right now at nighttime, it's
That's below
below the
Yeah,
horizon.
it's not available.
I was kind of apparently, yeah, there were people who mentioned that it would, I saw stuff about people wondering if they'd be able to see it. And I guess it's kind of a greenish comet.
Almost all comets are greenish.
Yeah.
This
This one's
another
even
one.
more.
The green comet is
Yeah.
kind of a misnomer.
I don't know why are they calling it the demon comet? What's the story of that?
Because it has two horns coming off.
Well, a lot of them have that too, though, don't they?
Why do they
Yeah.
call it anything? Anything? I don't know.
Because they sell more papers that way.
Anyway, I thought that was, yeah, anyway. Okay, other thoughts on comet, or sorry, on eclipse or comets, or anything else for that matter? Question?
We have went camping and saw eclipse.
I'm sorry?
We went camping and saw the eclipse at the same time.
Oh, okay. You saw the eclipse? You're lucky.
And you're the only one in the room that gets
Gonna
to see a
the
few
next
more.
one. Yeah. Yep. Remember us all when you see the next one.
Right.
Yeah, not the next one after that.
I don't think so.
We got one more picture.
In the US, there's three.
So,
There's one up in Montana, and then the one that cuts across Colorado. I'll be in my 90s, I think.
well, you know, optimistic.
Okay, what's an eclipse? I don't remember.
There's optimism and then there's fantasy.
Just-
You know what I'm saying?
Just wheel me out there. And I'll be
Since
fine.
I made 20
That's right.
All right, well, this is something that I think had originally been on the schedule for like January maybe, and February possibly, and sort of ended up kind of getting delayed a couple of times, but I thought I would kind of finally, since I already had it finished, and frankly, I was too lazy this month to do anything new, I figured I'd go ahead and just present this one. Also, I just think it's kind of an interesting topic. So I'm going to talk a little bit about two kind of pioneering women astronomers who lived at very different times and under very different circumstances, had somewhat similar names, but there's really more, I found in their stories, a little bit more similarities than I would have perhaps expected. So I thought it might make a little bit of an interesting topic for us to take a little closer look to. Anybody ever read this book?
Yes.
This is
That was
the.
a great book.
It is a great book. If you ever want to borrow a copy, I have one.
And it's a quick read. It's
It-
not very big.
Yeah, this guy Richard Preston here later became kind of famous for writing a couple of books about, well, one of them was about Ebola outbreaks. So, but he's an excellent writer. Has written a number of nonfiction books. He has a brother who is a fiction writer. Anyway, this book came out some number of years ago. I think probably sometime in the 80s. It basically kind of follows these two parallel stories throughout it. One is a group of essentially observational cosmologists who are kind of looking for the edge of the quasar cutoff, kind of the, the sort of beginning of galaxies, basically. And then another is the shoemakers who are looking for neos, basically. Probably one of the first really organized neo searches, right, that ever happened.
One of the first, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there had been others, but there was before them, actually, there was another one that was at Kitt Peak, I think.
Yeah.
The Space Watch program. Space Watch was slightly before that.
Yeah. Well, anyway, this book is kind of what planted the idea that eventually became this little presentation here, because as they follow Carolyn Shoemaker, who is essentially at the time of this book was a volunteer observer on this program, one of the things that she's very interested in is finding comets. And she's kind of in a little bit of, one-sided competition with Carolyn Herschel, who at that time was the leading woman discoverer of comets, and was, wanting to catch up with her. And I just kind of got intrigued by this little story about these two, as I found out, women with some very interesting parallels in their lives. So anyway, that was kind of the focus here. So obviously did not live at the same time, separated by a couple of centuries, but I thought there was some real interesting parallels. And also a little bit of interesting insights into kind of astronomical history. So anyway, that's kind of the origin of what I wanted to talk a little bit more about tonight. So here's a picture of some astronomers back in 1939. I just found this one. It's the International Conference on Novae and White Dwarf Stars. There was nothing particularly that drew me to this particular conference. What's the point here is you see what I would consider to be kind of a typical group of astronomers for this particular time, and there's one woman right there. That's actually Cecilia Payne, who is Cecilia Payne Gapushkin later, who was a very eminent astronomer, made huge contributions to the field. But it was relatively unusual, even by the 30s, to have women working in what was and to a certain extent remains a very male-dominated field. Those that did work in it were a lot of times more in this manner of contribution. These are a group of what were called computers. This was at the Harvard Astrophysical Observatory. This would have been probably maybe even a little earlier than the previous picture. But the computers in those days were humans whose job essentially was to do arithmetic, right, to do calculation. And they were very frequently women. They were often very highly educated. A lot of them had degrees in math or science or some STEM field like that. But because of the circumstances under which things worked in those days, their professional opportunities were somewhat limited. And I think that the contributions of these two women I want to talk about tonight become even more kind of noteworthy when you consider that I think things have changed quite a lot now, but there's a history here of underrepresentation. So I thought I would just basically talk about them kind of in turn. And I think one of the other things that was interesting to me about them is they really had interesting lives, and interesting perhaps in ways that you wouldn't necessarily think. So this is Carolyn Herschel. Carolyn lived in the late 18th or mid 19th century. She was actually born in Germany, in what is now Germany. I think it was one of the at the time of her birth, I believe she was in Hanover, which I don't know if Germany as such didn't really exist then, right? It was a bunch of these kind of independent little states. So she was born in Hanover. Her early life was actually really, really very tough for a variety of reasons, right? She was a child of a Prussian military band musician, right? She was the 8th child, 4th daughter of a military band musician, which was, kind of a working class job, I guess you could say, at this particular time. She had some pretty significant childhood illnesses that were very restrictive on her, and proved to be very kind of restrictive of of her life. She had smallpox when she was 4 and typhus when she was 10. And the result of that was that her growth had been very limited. She was probably about 4 feet 8 tall and generally not in particularly good health. And that's important because, or at least it's significant to the story, because also, as it turns out, her mother was very opposed to kind of education in general, but particularly education of girls. Right? So at the time and in the situation in which she was born, the chances, the kind of opportunities were to be something like a governess, which required a certain level of education and also a kind of, I guess, a certain level of, not sure how to put this, but attractiveness maybe might be the word I'm looking for here, which would have been very difficult for her. Or the other possibility would be to be essentially kind of a domestic servant. And that's really, I think, where her mother would have preferred for her to be. Her brothers actually got off a little bit better because their father wanted to educate them as musicians to essentially follow in his footsteps. And that plays into the story as well. But this was not a particularly good time for any of them to receive much more than a pretty rudimentary education. So her brothers got a little better education than she did, mostly in music. She was kind of in a very tough life situation because of the illnesses and the resulting kind of restrictions on her growth as a young person, and restrictions in her education really tended to kind of work against her and maybe make what followed, what she was able to accomplish in her life, all the more remarkable because of that. Of course, one of the other things that, as it turns out, was a very great advantage for her is one of her brothers went on to become one of the premier astronomers of his time. That was Sir William Herschel. William was Carolyn's older brother, and the two of them were actually quite close to each other. They had a very good kind of sibling relationship. Of course, we kind of think of William Herschel in terms of his astronomical discoveries, but he was actually his first career, and in some ways the one that he pursued through most of his life, was he was a musician. And in fact, he originally moved to England where he did most of his work and kind of rose to prominence as a astronomer and a scientist. He originally moved there to be a musician. He moved there to be a church musician, and I'm not remembering the Bath, I think, comes to mind, where he was a liturgical musician, right? He was also, this by the way is a recording of his music by, at the time it was made, contemporary musicians. So he was a composer, he was a performer, and apparently a rather talented one. Also had an interest in science, and again, back in those days, formal education in science was not the same as it is now, so a lot of scientists were basically self-educated people. And particularly in astronomy. Here's one other thing, I think this little drawing right here actually kind of represents this. Another thing that I've always found interesting about William Herschel is he actually discovered the idea, or proposed the idea of infrared light. All right, so we are familiar with the visible spectrum, right? It's the visible spectrum is the visible spectrum because the physiology of our eyes is such that the cells in your eyes are sensitive to light. But I think Herschel asked what I think would have been just an absolutely brilliant insight, which is, why isn't there light that we can't see? And he devised this very simple experiment where he projected sunlight through a prism, right, which separates it out into its constituent colors. And then he set up a series of thermometers in each of the color bands, and then off to the edge, right, in what would be now, we would understand now as longer wavelengths, right? And so he recorded changes in temperature, and that kind of told him that there was an energy flux out there that he couldn't see with his naked eye, because you can't. Technology to view that was much later. But he understood that there was infrared light. So anyway, I've always kind of found that sort of interesting. But of course, what he's probably best known for is astronomy, and particularly observation, but also telescope building. He was a very talented telescope builder as well. At one time, he actually built the largest telescope in the world, which never really worked all that well, and it was probably a cumbersome beast to, you know, it was this big, huge thing that you had to rotate, and anyway. But he was a rather talented observational astronomer and telescope builder. So William essentially asked his sister to join him in England. This was in 1772, and to essentially live in his house and assist him with astronomical projects. So obviously this was a huge break for Carolyn because it allowed her to, you know, work in something other than what her parents had probably sort of directed her to. She was also, I mean, this was not, you know, this was a close sibling relationship, but not necessarily I would call it an equal one. He essentially also expected her to essentially perform domestic duties. He was single at the time, but it was a real kind of opportunity for her to. So here's a kind of an image of William making a mirror. Right, he's grinding a mirror here, and she's bringing him his cup of tea while he grinds his mirror. So, but William's main work was in cataloging, which was probably what most astronomers were doing systematically at that time. He actually started the catalog that eventually became the Royal Astronomical Society's new general catalog. So whenever you see reference to an astronomical object that's designation is NGC something, right, that's the new general catalog. And Herschel was the one that started. It wasn't exactly called that in those days, but that's what it eventually developed into. So here's a version of it from, I believe this is from the early 1900s, but it's the new general catalog of nebula and clusters of stars. So that's what William was interested in, was identifying and mapping the locations of these things. Of course, in those days, there was no astronomical photography yet. That came along quite a bit after this. So it was all visual observation and description, basically, of coordinates. So the situation that they did was William would observe, he would identify where these objects were, pass that information along to Carolyn, who recorded it, and they were kind of a working team. And that was what they did for quite a long period of time.
I wonder if he ever let her look through the telescope.
Well, he did. And in fact, that's what, you know, here's a quote from Carolyn, right? So she was trained to be an assistant, and in those days, the assistant was the person that wrote stuff down, right? So now we have computers and stuff. We don't need people to write stuff down. But it was also understood that there was a lot of other stuff up there, and that William felt that his sister had the necessary skills and persistence and qualities to take advantage of that. So she was provided with a telescope that she called the sweeper for sweeping the night sky. It was, I'll see a picture here of it in just a second. And she was to sweep for comets. That was kind of the thing that William wanted her to do, was to look for comet. Took a little while for her to actually find one, but she spent, you know, she said she spent a couple of years basically sitting out on a lawn, just searching through the sky to actually find one. So there's a picture of her sweeper. This is in the Hanover Historical Museum. This was a telescope that was a little telescope that was built for her by William, very small one. So that was her real first independent observation gig, basically, was to sweep for comets. Eventually, though, she became an independent observer. This is a telescope that might be, I'm not sure if this is an original or not, but this would have been very similar to the one that William eventually built for her to do more systematic observation. So this has been pretty typical of the types of telescopes that they were using at that time, that big monstrous thing that you see in the pictures all the time. I don't know if that was ever really used for anything except maybe showing off, and occasionally, apparently, they would sit in the tube of the telescope and sing because it had really good, you know, acoustics, right? So they would, In fact, William wrote a song about it that my grumpy German astronomy professor sang for us in class one day, which I think it was very near the end of his career. And so I kind of get it now, right? But anyway, he sang this song for us in class one day about singing in the telescope too. But anyway, this would have been the working sort of scope that was being used at the time. And this was, again, just part of this ongoing project to try to identify and map objects in the catalog, right? And this is foundational work, right? This stuff that they did back in the 1800s is still in use. We still use this information, so this was very foundational work. But this was really her first major discovery. This was a cluster that I think is now just referred to as Carolyn's clusters, NGC 2360, so it would have been the 2,360th object that they cataloged, and it still carries that designation. It's right there, so there's Canis Major, there's NGC 2360 right there. And I think it's actually still referred to as Carolyn's cluster. Here's another one, M110, that she discovered. This was actually, no, she didn't discover this one. She cataloged its location, right? This was a private, well, this was a Messier object. So Messier was working at the somewhat similar time to all this. Messier's interest was he didn't want to confuse anything with a comet. So he was trying to figure out everything that was not a comet. I think she was the one that actually accurately fixed its location. So again, you know, a significant achievement for a visual observer at this time. These are some of the other clusters and objects that she's credited with discovering. Again, all cataloged in this. So a pretty significant, again, remember, this is a person who is basically viewing these things. No, there's no photography. There's certainly not any kind of digital recording of images. It's just a person looking through an eyepiece and, you know, kind of essentially sketching where these things were. But really, the thing that she became best known for was comet discoveries. And in particular, this was her first comet discovery, 1786. And this was also kind of significant because this was a paper that she read to the Royal Astronomical Society in 1786. This was the very first time a woman read a paper to the Royal Astronomical Society. Publication was a little different in those days. Nowadays, you know, we write papers and we submit them to journals, and editors and reviewers send us back nasty comments, and you know, after you've been through this a few times and cried enough tears, eventually you hope it gets published. Things worked a little differently in those days. They basically read this, so this was a letter that she read to them. So you can see it's from Mrs. Carolyn Herschel to Charles Blagden, who was the secretary of the Royal Society at that time, right? And I thought that I thought the wording of this was really interesting, right? Scientific writing has obviously changed quite a bit. But I venture to trouble you in his absence with the following imperfect account of a comet, right? This was a very humble way to do this. But she said she was using her brother's 20 feet reflector. I'm not sure exactly what that translated to in aperture, but they were talking about it in length. And she discovered this comet, and here's the diagrams that she made to kind of show where it was. So this was her first cometary discovery in 1786. I think her brother was in Germany at the time that this happened, so this was a truly independent discovery. This was her fifth cometary discovery. This is a page from a notebook. She had really beautiful handwriting. This would have been in May of 1790, and again, notice that this is the view through the large sweeper. This was another telescope that she had that was a handheld one. So this was the follow-on of the sweeper, and showing its location. So this was her fifth cometary discovery. The other thing that she did that was, well, I mean, catching up on the story of her and William. William eventually married, Unfortunately, his wife did not get along especially well with Carolyn. There may have been a little competition of sort of, sibling versus filial rivalry there a little bit. It kind of put a little bit of a strain on the Herschel's sibling relationship, although they still remained close and working, but it kind of encouraged her a little bit. Also, William kind of went from being a musician to being an astronomer. He was, I think, the first astronomer royal, and essentially was paid, and he had to move in order to accept this position, and Carolyn did not like the new digs, basically. So the result of that is she began to kind of work much more independently of him. And one of the tasks that she took on was updating another earlier catalog, the Flamsteed catalog, which was predated the catalog but needed a lot of sort of updating. So here's kind of a page. I just kind of put this up here to show you what these catalogs actually looked like. This is just very laborious work of identifying objects, determining where they were, putting them into big pages like this. I mean, this would be difficult, labor-intensive work, but she took to it really well. Was very skilled at this. She also worked on this, and this actually continued after William passed away, who died relatively young. She began working with his son, also Sir Herschel. This was Sir John Herschel, on this cataloging. It's sometimes kind of delicately put in some of the accounts that she worked with him. She was really running the show, and he essentially was kind of following along with this. But that actually occupied her through most of the latter part of her life, was working on this very important catalog. This, by the way, was William's son with his wife, and they maintained a very close relationship. They were, that would become aunt and nephew, right? They maintained a very close relationship right up to her death. So died in 1848, actually at a rather advanced age. She, considering her early health challenges, lived to be a good long life. Here's some of the things that I think are kind of noteworthy. She was really the first paid professional astronomer. Eventually she received a royal stipend, I believe £80 a year, which was not bad for the times. She discovered 8 comets, cataloged about 2,500 nebula, and was one of the first 2 women to be made honorary members of the Royal Astronomical Society. It was a little while yet before women were full members, but she was one of the first 2 to be made an honorary member. And here's some other accolades. She received the gold medal of the Royal Astronomical Society, eventually was elected to membership. I guess I should have thrown that in there. Received the gold medal from the King of Prussia, has a lunar crater named after her, and also a minor planet. I couldn't find a picture of the minor planet because, pictures of minor planets are hard to come by. This is actually a rendering of its shape that was made with radar data. So this is one that's been studied with radar, and a shape has been determined. So not a particularly good representation, but it's all I could find. And of course, probably the most, one of the most noteworthy recognitions that you can receive here in our time is she was the Google Doodle one day. So there's Carolyn with her telescope looking at the sky. Okay, so that's the life of Carolyn Herschel. So we jump forward a little while, and we'll look at Carolyn Shoemaker, who's passed away not that long ago, but was active through quite a bit of the 20th and 21st centuries. And again, one of the things that kind of struck me about these two is that there was a lot of parallels in their life, right? Not perfect parallels, but one of them is that neither of them really had any training at all to be astronomers. Carolyn was actually educated. She had gone to kind of college, but in education, which again was a pretty common, particular elementary education, pretty common field for women at the time in her time. So she was born in Gallup, New Mexico, 1929, went to Chico State College. Her family were essentially farmers. They moved to California and ran a farm. Received a bachelor's and a master's degrees in education, so well educated. Worked as an elementary school teacher. Basically, from the accounts that I've read, did not like it very much. Thought that, found it to be, and so basically left the teaching profession. But again, the thing that was probably an entry to her later work as an astronomer was that she met Eugene Shoemaker and married him in 1951. And Gene Shoemaker was her brother's college roommate. So they'd both gone to Caltech and were roommates. And the story was that Eugene had gone on, he graduated from Caltech and gone on to Princeton to do his PhD in geology. He was a geologist. And came back for the wedding, for Carolyn's brother's wedding. They met, kind of hit it off, eventually initiated a relationship, and were married in 1951. So there's Eugene Shoemaker, probably, I don't know, one of the most eminent American scientists of the past century, and was the father of planetary geology. I think the grants that, Gary, that you've gotten to upgrade the Tomball and do some of the NEO work were named in honor of those Shoemakers, right? So very, very prominent. Was the director, founding member of the Planetary Geology Division of the U.S. Geological Survey. Kind of made his reputation by mapping Meteor Crater in Arizona, which at the time, despite its name, it was not clear that it was actually a meteor crater. And his geological mapping of it essentially proved that it was, that it demonstrated.
He was kind of considered to be a traitor to geologists because he said things change rapidly.
Yeah.
And other geologists would say, no.
Yeah,
everything happens over a long period of time.
Yeah, but anybody that has a tie like that, you gotta like it, right? You know? And I always love the pictures of geologists with the hammer, It's like necessary. But the thing that really ended exactly that he became interested in impact geology and the effect that these rapid changes might have. In order to kind of understand cratering a little bit better, he worked in this place called the Paradox Valley in Colorado, and where they did some subterranean nuclear testing. And then in Nevada as well, they were, that's back in actually some of these were not subterranean; these were surface nuclear tests. They actually did stuff like that back in those days. They were blowing these things up on the surface. It's actually one of the reasons. It's actually one of the ways you can date things now is you look for the strontium that's left over from all those, which we all have lots of it in our bones right now because of that. Anyway, so one of the things that he set out to do was to try to understand a little bit better the impact history of the Earth, and then he figured in order to do that he had to understand a little bit better the Earth crossing. The whole notion of Earth crossing minor planets, right? So he set out actually with a colleague of his in the USGS named Eleanor Helen. They set out to do a survey together. They eventually kind of decided they would each work in a slightly different thing, but so Gene was kind of decided he wanted to look much more at a particular group of very close objects. And that left him with kind of a dilemma, actually. He could get access to telescopes. This is a Schmidt camera that's at Mount Palomar. But he didn't really have a whole lot of money to do this with, right? He had a few $1,000s from the USGS, basically just enough to buy the film that you put inside these things, right? So the way these cameras worked was you took a big roll of film, almost like a roll of paper towels, right? Except it was film. And you cut a big chunk. They had this machine that kind of flanked off a big piece of it, and then you cut these big circular ones and put them in this special chamber and kind of baked them with some chemicals to make them even more light sensitive, and then stick them inside a light-sensitive box, run over to the telescope in pitch dark, stick this thing in there. This little object that Carolyn's holding here is the film holder right there, and then that would go inside, and then and it must have been just an awful process, Thank God for CCDs and CMOS cameras, right? They made this whole stuff way easier. But anyway, the point is that he only really had enough money to buy film and gas to get to, he lived in Flagstaff, Arizona, so he had enough money to buy film and gas and not pay anyone to be an assistant. And so at age 51, Carolyn became the observational astronomer in this, an unpaid volunteer on this project, this super important project to kind of understand a little bit better the distribution of close objects. And this partnership continued for quite a while. Here they are posing in front. Nice picture, right? They look like, nice grandparents. But this was a very serious survey to kind of understand the nature of what that time was very poorly understood aspect of the solar system. So here is a description of the first Palomar planet-crossing asteroid study. This was by Halen and Shoemaker. This became the project that Carolyn began working on. And at some point in there, she kind of became essentially the lead observer on all this, right? So her job basically was to take the photographs, right? Probably wrestle this very monstrous looking thing around. Take the exposed shots, the exposed film, develop them, hopefully doing a better job than I did back in college. She must have, because it worked. And then put them in this stereo microscope thing right here, and then just visually examine this plate for anything that's moving, basically. And at one point she discovered a comet and got kind of hooked on that, because I can only imagine how exciting that would be. And became just in addition to cataloging the locations of all these minor planets, became just really dedicated to this idea of searching for comets. And that's really how she became well known. Probably the best known comet, of course, grew out of her collaboration with another comet hunting astronomer, David Levy. This was Shoemaker-Levy 9. This was, of course, the comet that collided with Jupiter, which was kind of a interesting moment, because up to then, no one had ever really seen a comet run into anything, or at least survived it. So this was a very noteworthy discovery. So there's a picture of it. This was taken by the Hubble. There's that shot after this collision, which took place in the early 90s. So her reputation as a comet hunter really became, I think, her main area of notoriety. So between 1983 and 1994, 32 total discoveries. That I think would be a pretty respectable haul. I actually looked up a couple of things. So she discovered 32 comets, which is second all time, 9 of them periodic. Here's a list, I hope, if this works, of her comets. So there's her list of comets right there. There's Shoemaker-Levy 9 right there, the one that hit Jupiter. And what maybe even a little bit more impressive, 377 numbered minor planets. So if you look at this here, if you go down to somewhere down here, dang it, I thought I did a better job on this. There's a list somewhere, this is her her Wikipedia page, obviously. Somewhere in all this mess, there is a list of her, there it is, a list of her minor planets. Look at all of that.
She got to name them.
Yeah. Some of these are named after members of her family. I actually kind of got to looking through some
There
of
was
these.
one of them named Eugene.
Yeah, there's one named Eugene. There's one named, where is it? Boy, this is a heck of a list, isn't it? There was one called Kimchinsky, and it was named for her daughter-in-law. And it was kind of one of the little funny points in that book that I showed you, where apparently what the shoemakers did one Christmas was they gave all of their children planets. They gave them little pictures of these minor planets named after them, and including Paula Kimchinsky, who was one of their daughters-in-law, who is now a really well-known like cookbook writer or something like that. But anyway, and her daughter-in-law, you know, told her friend that she got a planet for Christmas, and one of her friends basically said, "Well, geez, all I got were washcloths," or something like that. You know, so it was kind of a funny little line. But anyway, I was kind of looking at some of these, who some of these people actually were, and some of them I kind of recognize. There was one that there's Zeus right there. There's one named for Vera Rubin. Anyway, there's one name for Bop. That was the Bop of Hale Bop. And I think there's a Hale in there somewhere too. I always kind of wondered who Mark Robinson was. Stephen Jay Gould. There we go. Anyway, so again, point being that this is a pretty impressive.
It says Cromer.
Is it?
Come down from your mouse
Oh,
down
there
right
you
there.
There you go. Dave.
1981 JE2.
Okay.
May 5th, 1981, Palomar. Carolyn. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
wonder where she got that read. Maybe my dad knew her.
There you go. Anyway, so again, kind of an impressive accomplishment for anyone, but for a person who essentially took up astronomy at age 51, a pretty impressive. So again, she's also pretty well known for her collaboration with David Levy. There's the picture of David Levy and the shoemakers there. They're showing a picture of the impact there, the Shoemaker-Levy 9 impact. One of the other things I thought was kind of interesting was that she eventually, and again, I should note that Dean Shoemaker died relatively young in an automobile accident in Australia. They were in Australia mapping impact craters and were involved in a car accident. He was killed. She was rather badly injured. Was rather lucky to have survived. So after Jean's death, she continued working and was actually received some academic appointments, which is really tough to do if you're not credentialed, right? That's a really an unusual and noteworthy thing. So she was from 1980 to 1989 was a visiting scientist with the U.S. Department of the U.S. Geological Survey in Flagstaff, Arizona, which is where Jean worked. And this was a paid position, and that's really unusual because the way federal hiring guidelines work, it's almost impossible to get a job if you have a relative that has a job. So anyway, that was pretty noteworthy. She then became a research professor at Northern Arizona University, which is also in Flagstaff, from 1989 until she retired. So she was on the faculty there as a research professor. Actually taught some courses, from what I understand too. So again, that's a pretty noteworthy thing for a person who doesn't necessarily have a background in the particular area. So I think I already showed that slide. What's going on here? Anyway, so I guess a fitting way to kind of end this was when she died at age 92, her obituary appeared in the New York Times, which is a rather noteworthy thing because usually that's reserved for the people who are rather prominent. So anyway, I just, again, I thought that there was a lot of similarities and a lot of interesting parallels between these two people, and I just thought it might be interesting to talk a little bit about. Questions?
If you go back through the list of names of asteroids, there's a Coinco. That's Cody, Wendy, and Courtney. That's my 3 kids.
Oh, really?
That's the reason why you get to play with the names a little bit.
Okay.
And, you know, normally they say you can suggest a name if you're a discoverer, but they always have to have the last word. So if they think something's out of whack here, they won't assign it. But they
Oh,
did
that's
that one,
interesting.
Coinco. So Coinco's in there.
This is not in the list she discovered though, right? Because you discovered that.
No, that was one of my discoveries.
Yeah. Yeah, well, they named one Caltech, I guess, after, Christy Carroll was another, I know was another of their kids. Patrick Jean, I think, was their son. Probably still is, for that matter.
There's also a Topeka, by the way.
Yeah. There's one called Nork. It was named after a computer. Yeah, N-O-R-C, Nork. There's one called Mr. Spock.
There's a lot of Star Trek references.
Mhm. Oh, Dionysus is kind of an interesting one. I wonder if they'd had some wine before they named that one. Anyway, so, questions? Anything? I hope this was...
I did meet Carolyn in 1999 in Flagstaff.
Yeah.
We had a meeting out there, and that was an interesting time to talk to her a little bit. Of course, the problem was David Levy was nearby, so he couldn't hardly get words in edgewise, so.
Is David kind of
He's kind of a talker.
loquacious?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the stuff that I read about Carolyn was that, emphasized the fact that she's like a genuinely pleasant person, too.
Yeah,
And
yeah, she's very, very, quiet. And,
I saw him give a talk once, and it was really good. He was a very good speaker. I think she might have been there, but I didn't meet her or anything, so.
Is that guy from Lawrence gonna do next month?
I have not been able to get in touch with him. I sent him an email and I've not heard anything back. So right now I'm still,
David Cole,
yeah.
I think he's kind of busy right now. There's some health issues in the family.
I think that was